Silver didn't fluctuate this week. It broke character. The kind of break that happens when someone inside the machine realizes the machine stopped pricing and started rationing. Margin adjustments. Export control whispers. Mines getting paid before they dig. Every move broadcasting the same transmission. This stopped being about cost. It's about who holds metal when the drawer runs empty. This isn't volatility. It's sovereignty dressed as market noise. Real speculation looks like a circus. Loud. Crowded. Everyone chasing the same spin. Strategic repositioning looks different. Quiet calls. Policy shifts. Contracts that never print publicly. That's what's happening now. And the crowd still pretends silver is too small to matter, watching futures like it's entertainment. Fatal error. Silver isn't small. Silver is narrow. Narrow markets don't cushion impact. They shatter. Picture a suspension bridge built for foot traffic. Strength doesn't save it when you force a stampede across. The structure fails. Now watch what's stampeding toward it. Industrial demand doesn't negotiate. Solar panels don't pause for chart patterns. Electronics don't wait for sentiment. Defense procurement doesn't care about your position. When demand becomes non-negotiable, supply becomes the only question that matters. Who secures it? Who controls the tap? Who gets locked out first? Latin America just entered the spotlight. Not because of silver alone. When you extract silver from those mines, you're pulling a package deal. Copper. Lead. The entire material base that keeps modern infrastructure functional. This fight isn't about one metal. Silver is just the visible crack in a much larger structural problem. The doorway you can see through into the hallway behind it where every critical input lives. Here's the thread you need to hold while everyone else debates candlestick formations. If Latin American supply chains compress, what else compresses with them? Don't answer yet. Just hold it. Because the wiring underneath is starting to smoke. Export controls discussed in the same conversations as margin adjustments. That pairing doesn't happen in normal markets. Margin changes are technical. Export controls are geopolitical. When those two mechanisms move together, you're not watching price discovery anymore. You're watching power discovery. And the most exposed wire in this entire circuit runs straight through Taiwan. Nobody wants to say that part out loud because it forces you to connect what the surface narrative keeps separated. But the connection is mechanical. Resources aren't just commodities. Resources buy influence. Influence buys votes. Votes buy legitimacy. Legitimacy buys time. And when red lines get drawn, time becomes the asset every major power hoards above all else. If you understand how UN diplomacy actually operates, you already know what comes next. Latin America isn't just about extraction and logistics. It's about alignment, trade corridors, security relationships, public positioning, quiet commitments. The same nations sitting on critical deposits also sit in voting blocks. They shape international narratives. They open access. They deny it. So when silver supply chains tied to Latin America show stress, you're not watching a commodity under pressure. You're watching the chessboard tilt. And when the board tilts, Taiwan stops being abstract and becomes a countdown. Now look at the war signals hiding in broad daylight. First, volatility that doesn't move like speculation. Speculative manias are obvious. Volume floods in. Stories go viral. Everyone's performing. This feels like scrambling. Like professionals hedging exposure their models can't capture. Second, inventory levels that offer zero comfort. Thick stockpiles absorb shocks. Thin stockpiles turn shocks into warnings. Silver has been running lean for years. That matters because when buffers vanish, paper markets keep functioning, but physical markets start rationing. And once rationing begins, price becomes theater. Third, direct mine prepayments. When industrial giants start paying mines up front, they're not timing dips. They're securing oxygen before the air gets thin. That's not a trade. That's survival positioning. And when one major buyer moves, others follow. Because no executive wants to announce $1 billion facility and then quietly admit they can't source inputs. Now add the corporate signal that spooked people for entirely wrong reasons. Asian commentary praising a major tech manufacturer for being operational again. Markets celebrated. Shares rallied. Everyone treated it like a recovery narrative. But buried inside that celebration is the real story. Next generation memory architecture. Advanced hardware pipelines. Battery technology that could fundamentally alter charging behavior. We don't need hype. We need mechanics. If battery tech accelerates charging speed and improves safety margins, adoption pressure intensifies. Infrastructure gets redesigned. Demand for conductive and specialty materials shifts permanently. And when China explores new silver applications in charging systems, that's not experimental. That's a demand vector, a new claim on finite supply. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. If silver demand becomes structural across energy, transportation, and defense simultaneously, who gets priority when supply tightens? You with a brokerage login, or governments and corporations that write contracts, direct policy, and reroute physical flow? That's the strategic shift happening underneath the noise. That's why daily price movement is a distraction, because a screen can display any number. It can't display metal that doesn't exist. We're not speculating. We're measuring. So bring this back to the tape for a moment, because the tape is confessing. Silver has been respecting technical levels with unusual precision. That's abnormal. Gold usually trades like fog. Silver usually trades like a blade. Yet here, silver is drawing boundaries and holding them. Do you know what that indicates? Large capital using levels as operational terrain, not charting theory. When ledges get breached and then immediately reclaimed, you're watching liquidity extraction. They punch through a level to trigger stops, absorb inventory, then snap it back. That's not randomness. That's harvesting. And when the market keeps reclaiming higher ground after each washout, you're witnessing something more critical: cap and release behavior. The market sells hard, shakes weak holders, then stabilizes higher. Then repeats, like a spring compressing and releasing, storing energy with each cycle. Here's where most participants trap themselves. They fixate on 15-minute intervals and call it signal. But sometimes the chart is just reflecting stress originating elsewhere. So what actually matters? Watch for catalysts that would genuinely change the story. Real switches. If silver drops alongside credible peace negotiations, that's a legitimate off-ramp. Risk exits the board. Volatility deflates. If silver drops alongside meaningful tariff de-escalation, that's another real exit. But if the drop happens while tariffs harden, while export controls get formalized, while Latin America becomes contested ground, then the dip isn't relief. It's a trapdoor. Because the conflict isn't fading. It's being institutionalized. Mexico discussing tougher China tariffs isn't a trade adjustment. It's a power projection signal. The old playbook in modern syntax. And silver is the cleanest place to see it because it sits exactly at the intersection of industrial necessity and supply chain leverage. But oil is the heavyweight that determines how fast this escalates from markets into history. If a major power tightens control over a large producer, energy pricing becomes a weapon. And energy is the universal cost. Higher oil cascades through transport, food, manufacturing, everything. Now take the next step. If a rival benefits from cheap energy because it keeps their factories competitive, do you think the opposing side wants to grant them cheap energy indefinitely? Obviously not. So you get pressure, then counterpressure, then accidents, then headlines that seem disconnected until they converge. This is how escalation operates. Slowly, then all at once. Now the mandatory line, because we manage risk, not fantasy. This is educational content, not financial advice. We don't predict. We condition. We watch the signals. And the signals are screaming. Here's one hiding in plain sight. Gold rising alongside silver. That pairing matters. If silver were just a hot trade, gold wouldn't necessarily participate. Gold is the risk barometer. Gold moving with silver suggests the market is detecting a broader strategic fracture, not just commodity imbalance, confidence imbalance. And once confidence fractures, governments don't stabilize markets with press releases. They move policy. You see why export control discussions matter so intensely now. Because the moment controls become operational, the market doesn't reprice by percentages. It reprices by regime. A commodity becomes a strategic asset, and strategic assets don't trade like industrial metals. They trade like semiconductors, like energy, like national security. There's another loop we haven't closed, the Taiwan linkage. If you're asking how Latin America connects to Taiwan, the answer is simple. When competition intensifies, every vote, every port, every supply commitment becomes part of the calculation. And if one side anticipates future restrictions or conflict around Taiwan, it doesn't wait for the crisis. It secures resources now. That means investing in overseas resource relationships, financing projects, locking long-term contracts, building supply redundancy. Because if a choke point becomes contested, you don't want to be sourcing metal mid-crisis. You want your metal already allocated. That's what strategic behavior looks like. Quiet preparation, loud consequences, and it explains why silver looks irrational on screens while being perfectly rational underneath. Now let's get practical because we're not here for theory. If you're watching this, you're asking the same question circulating through our community. If silver is being pulled into a resource contest, what do? We do what we always do. Separate facts from interpretation. Fact, volatility is extreme. Fact, policy language is entering market conversations. Fact, industrial demand remains inelastic. Fact, Latin American supply chains are under geopolitical scrutiny. Interpretation, the market is transitioning from price-based competition to availability-based competition. Possible risk, if tensions ease, premiums deflate rapidly. Likely risk, if tensions harden, availability becomes the story and paper prices lag physical reality. So what do we watch first? We watch for confirmation this isn't just rhetoric. Firm export actions, more reports of prepayments and long-term offtake agreements. Tariff escalation spreading regionally. Energy policy shifts affecting rival cost structures. And physical market signals, not just spot prices. Premiums, delivery delays, inventory language, allocation language. Those words, because when dealers and refiners start sounding like wartime ration offices, the chart becomes irrelevant. Here's a question for you. If paper price dips, but real-world premiums refuse to fall, who's lying? The screen or the shelf? Drop your answer in the comments, because how you think about that question determines whether you panic at the wrong moment. Another question. What do you believe this is really about? A metal or a map? Comment metal or map and explain why. Before we close, address the emotional trap. The system loves volatility because volatility creates fatigue. Fatigue creates errors. You get motion sickness. You sell just to stop feeling. Oldest trick in the book, and it works especially well when narratives get confusing. So we don't let narratives steer us. We let mechanics steer us. Mechanics over mood. Watch this. When you see sharp selling near a level, then see price return to that same zone repeatedly, you're witnessing a test. In previous cycles, repeated selling usually continued. But lately something shifted. When price reclaims certain zones, it holds them longer. That behavior matters because it suggests stronger hands defending higher ground. Not perfectly, not every time, but enough to notice. And when that happens during geopolitical stress, it's not just traders. It's hedgers. It's procurement teams. It's entities protecting future input costs. The market wants you to believe this is just silver, but watch the ripple. Copper moves. Energy moves. Rates move. Currencies twitch. These are connected systems. Silver just happens to be the pipe that makes noise first. Here's what matters. Watch policy language as closely as charts. Watch Latin America not as emerging markets, but as strategic terrain. Treat Taiwan not as distant headline, but as a variable changing procurement behavior today. And respect that in thin markets, small force creates large events. If you want these briefings without missing the days when the story pivots, subscribe. Stay with us because the next phase won't announce itself politely. It'll appear as a minor headline, then hit the tape like a freight train. And there's one development we're tracking right now that could invert the entire risk map overnight. It's not about silver's price. It's about who signs the next contract and who gets left holding paper promises. And yes, the Venezuela angle matters more than most admit. When you restrict a rival's access to discounted barrels, you're not just affecting an oil chart. You're affecting their entire industrial cost structure. That's why energy sanctions, shipping insurance restrictions, and secondary penalties are never just legal mechanisms. They're economic torque. Now place that beside metals. If a nation can't rely on energy inputs, it starts hoarding what it can control. Materials, concentrates, long-term mine output commitments. That's why silver keeps appearing in conversations where it shouldn't. Because silver sits inside the electrification stack, the defense stack, and the electronics stack. One disruption. 3 industries feel it simultaneously. Then there's the Gulf wildcard. Some people assume alliances are permanent. They're not. Security guarantees, advanced weaponry, financing, favorable pricing. That's what purchases loyalty. So when you hear confident declarations like they'll never do that, remember nations behave like corporations. When incentives shift, they move toward leverage. Here's the signal to watch next. If you see energy producers coordinating tighter supply while metals policies simultaneously tighten, that's not coincidence. That's coordination. And when coordination begins, the next headline won't be silver is volatile. It'll be someone couldn't get delivery. That's the moment the